So I wonder what things you've learned on YouTube. I mean, you can learn to do anything on YouTube. As I think about my history with YouTube, I learned to cut my family's hair during lockdown of COVID. I learned how to get rid of the box elder bugs that were laying eggs on our siding in disgusting quantities. I learned how to take care of that on YouTube. It was a really long video that was basically this one thing. Take a sponge with soapy water and wipe down your siding. And it was like a 20-minute video. It was hilarious. I kept watching, which is the thing, right? They want you to keep watching. So I kept watching to be like, there's got to be more to this. There wasn't. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet on YouTube, although that one didn't go very well. And the problem that I thought we had, we didn't have. And then Billy ended up having to replace the entire faucet after I tried to fix it. That one didn't go so well. And lately, I've learned a lot about gaming through seeing the videos that my kids are interested in. And through those things, YouTube leads you down this rabbit hole of one thing to the next. And my kids discovered this YouTuber named Ryan Trahan and this project that he was doing where he was traveling across the country on nothing but a penny. And we're going to talk about that this morning. So Ryan Trahan became big on YouTube, through fitness stuff initially, and he started to get a lot of viewers. And if you know about how Facebook works, so why do I keep saying that? If you know about how YouTube works, the more views you get, the more money YouTube pays you. So he was looking for ways, obviously, as all YouTubers are, to get more views. And he also was interested in how can I get more views while doing good in the world? So he did this project as a fundraiser for Feeding America to both get more views for himself, and also he set a goal to raise $100,000 to fight hunger by supporting Feeding America. So he has sort of parallel goals. One is to travel all the way across the country from California to the East Coast in, I believe it was North Carolina, with nothing but a penny to survive on, and then to deliver that penny to another YouTuber named Mr. Beast on the East Coast. So that was one of his goals. The other one was to raise money. And here's how he raised money. He collected donations just from he had like a series of a ridiculous number of videos of segments, and there was like a link on his videos. But also he came up with this thing called the Great Reset. So with the Great Reset, anytime anyone donates $50,000, anytime he gets a $15,000 donation, he resets whatever he has to give up. Whatever he's traded for his penny, he gives it up and starts over with a penny. So with that penny, he has to figure out how to make enough money or how to gather enough resources to travel across the country. So he'll trade the penny for a pen, and then he'll sell the pen, and then he'll use the money to buy something else that he can sell, or he'll trade anything and everything to get to things like bus tickets, train tickets, rental cars, hotels. And sometimes he sleeps in his hammock between two trees in a random park. Okay, I think I've told you enough about Ryan Trahan and his penny project that we can watch. This is the very end of his penny project, and remember, he got to this point by trading. So let's watch Ryan Trahan deliver his penny, his giant penny, it turns out, to Mr. Beast.
Okay, so now we're about to reach the finish line. As I was riding with Preston with less than a mile left, I really started feeling the full emotions of this journey. I thought about the people I met along the way, like Dennis, Farina, Brandon, Ron. I thought about the generosity of random strangers that paid way too much money for bottles of water. The absolute belly laughs that I shared with random people, which didn't cost any money, by the way. Bruh. If this adventure has taught me anything, it's that life really isn't about the journey or destination. It's about the people you're doing it with. I can't tell if I'm crying or if it's just the wind. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Oh, we're almost there. No way, dude. Yay! Yes! Yes!
Thank you. Finally, after 30 days of watching, I have finally received a penny. And I don't know if you noticed, but we also brought your family and wife out. No, you didn't. Yes. After all this time, all the way across America to give me this, I had to do something special for you.
Dude, come here, man.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Wait, we're not done yet. I got one more surprise for you. As you know, this entire journey was for Feeding America to raise money.
Yes.
So I have 4 briefcases here. One has $100,000, one has 50, one has 25, and I think one has 10. I forgot, 10 or 0, something like that. Whichever you pick, I'll donate what's inside to Feeding America.
Oh my gosh. I'm just gonna put my hand over each one and then you guys can cheer. Okay? Okay, what about this one? I think there's a clear winner.
Okay.
Yes! My legs are literally shaking so hard.
All right, go for it.
50,000! We all have to do the Great Reset pose together.
I didn't know we were supposed to say
You
it.
have to say it, Mr. V. He has to say it.
All right, do it one more time.
Okay.
50 grand. I got my penny. Now what are you doing?
I'm going to sleep.
Okay, I got a bed. Thanks for watching.
Bye!
The video keeps going to show how many donors he had. It ended up being thousands of donors, and he set out a goal to raise $100,000. He raised $1.3 million, and it was something like 10 million meals or something for Feeding America. So trading got him there. Trading. We'll talk a little bit more about Ryan Trahan. It's funny to me. It's hilarious to me that I'm talking about Ryan Trahan and Mr. Beast in a sermon. But the connection that I made this past week when I was studying for this sermon is trading. Jesus tells a story where he praises people who traded. A parable, if you'll remember, is a cutesy little phrase, an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. A parable is a story that Jesus tells. He uses a story to teach something, and he uses stories because stories stick more than quotes, more than facts. Stories stick. So Jesus uses stories to teach. So we're going to talk about the parable of the talents today, and talents is a word that refers to money in the ancient world. So talents is money. So this is a story, it's a parable to teach us something about money. So commentators have sort of 3 bare minimum meanings that come out of this parable. They didn't say they're bare minimum. I think they're bare minimum. So the first one is how to behave. This is the moral of this story is how to behave after Jesus goes back into heaven. And how we're to behave is don't be lazy or useless. That's kind of bare minimum, right? Like, don't be lazy or useless. The second teaching is that God owns everything and we only possess it for a little while. Also true. God owns everything, and we only possess it for a little while. And a third one is that money should never control you. You control your money as much as you control anything in life. Money doesn't control you, you control your money. So let's read the story together. This is from Matthew chapter 25, and listen for how Jesus praises trading. And then be curious with me, if you'll humor me with this Mr. Beast and Ryan Trahan thing, be curious with me about how that story connects with what Jesus says in this parable. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. At once, the one who had received the 5 talents went off and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. So here's the thing I'm curious about. According to his ability, so the master chooses to give different amounts of money, different numbers of talents to the 3 slaves. And I wonder, what were the criteria that Jesus uses? The master, What were the criteria that the master is using? How did the master know, well, I'm going to give that person 5, and that person 2, and that person 1? I don't know. I'm just curious about it. We'll learn a little bit more about that as the story goes on. So, verse 19, let's pick it up again. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. I've made 5 more talents. And the master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You've been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. And his master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You've been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. So the master praises those who traded. The master praises those who took some risks with the money that he had left them. Those who used what they had in order to make more, like Ryan Trahan, who used his YouTube fame, even used his desire to get more viewers to do something good in the world. His motives weren't necessarily pure to do that, right? Like he's working on his own, building his own fame while also wanting to do something good in the world. So Ryan Trahan traded, and he submitted himself to risk in the same way that the faithful slaves did. There's always risk involved in trading. There's risk involved in Ryan's project. He risked sleeping in cars or in hammocks for a greater good, and he continued to submit himself to that risk with every great reset. So the master praises this kind of craftiness and risk-taking for profit. So we're going to read the rest of the parable in a second, but before we do, there's a couple things I need to say about this parable. So we're about to come up to the part where the master or the servant, the slave who only had 1 talent, buried it in the ground. He didn't do anything with the talent, and this displeases the master greatly, and the master condemns him. So there's a couple problems in this parable in general, a couple problems that could get us tripped up. Slavery. This master has slaves. This is problematic for those of us, well, for all of us, who know that slavery is wrong and extremely harmful. So that's a problem in this parable. There's another problem in this parable that doesn't feel great to me, and that's the condemnation of this slave who buries the talent. The master condemns this fearful slave, and that doesn't feel good to me. Someone who believes in mercy and grace, that doesn't feel great to me. And there's another problem in this parable, and that is the rich get richer. The master says to the slaves who earned more money, like, I'm going to put you in charge of even more. And to the one who buries the talent in the ground, I'm going to take from you what you have and give it to those who have more, and you're going to have nothing. So, why? Why are those things in the parable? And to what extent should we get tripped up by them? Well, here's the thing I want to say about Jesus and his world and how the authors tell the stories of Jesus, and that is Jesus tells stories using the world that the hearers of the stories would know. So a parable is set in the setting that the hearers of the parable would be familiar with. So these are ancient people in an ancient time when slavery was normal. And it was common for masters to abuse their slaves. This was a normal thing. And where there were strict divisions between ideas of heaven and hell and the existing beliefs of the time. And of course, in any culture or society where there's a big division between the rich and the poor, this was true for them too, that the rich would get richer, but the poor could never advance. So while these things in the parable are very disturbing, and we should look at them and say, that is not how things should be, and that is not how Jesus wanted things to be, we need to remember that this was a teaching tool that Jesus was going to use. And how would he have told a story with a meaning if he started out by saying, like, creating this world that they weren't familiar with, where there was no slavery, where the divisions between rich and poor were not so great? How would he have taught them anything if he only talked about this world where all these things were different? Now, he does that in other places. He teaches against these kinds of systems that are presented as normal in this parable. But that's not his purpose here. He wants to teach them something about how they are to live while they wait for heaven to be made real on earth. So while we should notice these things and be upset by them, we can also be attentive to what Jesus wants to say to them. So let's pick up the story at verse 24. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I do not sow and gather where I do not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So again, Jesus isn't teaching about heaven and hell here. He's teaching about how we are to live with our money while we wait for God to make heaven fully real here on earth. So here's a question. What's the difference between the man who buried his talent and the other two? What's the difference? I mean, the master clearly knows that there's something different about this man versus the other men in that he only gives him 1 talent. So what's the difference that both the man who only receives the 1 talent and the master are noticing? In verse 24, the man who only received 1 talent, he says this, I knew that you were a harsh man, and I was afraid. I was afraid. So I wonder if he had a different relationship with the master than the other two did. What was it that made him afraid to the point of burying the talent versus the other two who went out and traded with it and took risks with it. They say that all children who grow up in the same house have different experiences with their parents, that all kids have a different parent, even if they're all the same parents. Because things happen, there's personality differences, there's time differences, things are happening in your life in one way when one kid is 3, and then things are happening in your life in another way when the other kid is 3. So every kid in the same household grows up with different parents. And I wonder what had happened. What happened that this slave was afraid and the other two weren't with the same master? I don't know. But I think there is some truth in this for us, that there's lots and lots of factors that impact our ability to take risks, our ability to be scrappy, our ability to be creative. There's lots of factors, and some people are more able to do that, and some people aren't. And for some people, risk-taking is a negative thing, and for some people, risk-taking is a positive thing. There are so many complexities here. But what happens in the end is that the man who was afraid and buried his talent ends up blaming the master. Did you catch that? When the man asks him, "Why didn't you do something with this so that I could have more for my return?" And the slave says, "Because I knew you were a harsh man." Like, it's not my fault, it's your fault. You were going to be mean to me when I didn't do it right, and so I just didn't do anything with it. That does not fly well with the master, obviously. Again, there's so many complexities here, but the question is an important one, I think. And I want to ask you a question, or us together, because I'm asking myself the same question. Are you burying what God has given you in the ground? Are you living a life that is smaller than what God hopes for from you? What are you burying in the ground because you're too afraid? Too afraid of God's wrath, maybe, if you don't do it right. Too afraid of someone else's judgment. Too afraid of failing. Too afraid of being vulnerable. Too afraid of not having it all together and looking stupid. What are you burying in the ground that God has given you to trade, to be out there in the world with, to be making a difference with, to giving God a return on God's investment? So this is why I say that the meaning of the parable is don't be lazy or useless, I think, is sort of the bare minimum. I think God is calling us to so much more than just don't be lazy. I think God is calling us to take some risks, to be creative, to trade whatever God has given us up, to trade it up, to make some good in the world out of what God has given to us.